Welcome to Engaged In, where educators, leaders, and innovators come together to examine student engagement from every angle. This series invites you to deepen your understanding, expand your toolkit, and make meaningful connections that drive impact. I'm Bridget Reith, an early literacy coach at Ignite Engagement Coordinator at Kent ISD.
And I'm Sarah Wood. I'm one of the educational technology consultants at Kent ISD. So our final agenda, it seems weird to say that for this series for this academic year, we are going to start off with our usual announcements and just a big reminder to please, for any of these recordings that you have, complete the sketch form at the end to receive participation or receive sketch credit for that for your participation and listening. We do have our link to our slide deck for today, so you can follow along. And don't forget, and this might be a perfect time of year to kind of double down on your sketch credits by putting something you've learned into practice. So we invite you to not only get credit for listening and participating, but also to double down.
So as kind of a connector to get us thinking about assessment today, I have a question, and that's, what is the common thread? So Sarah, if you want to click through until we get to the bobbin of thread show up, what connects all of these things? A Swedish Europop group, the song Thunderstruck, a compact disc, a wad of used chewing gum, the US Capitol, a bachelor's degree in English, and a PhD student who's done everything but their dissertation. I know, it seems kind of like a random grouping of things.
Well, as I'm thinking these through in my head and trying to relate them, of course, the first one, because this is my era, that Swedish Europop group, of course, was ABBA. And I'm thinking about how those letters are all capitalized letters. So they're ABBA. Sarah, what are you thinking?
I come down to the next two, and I think AC/DC did Thunderstruck.
Mm-hmm.
And in my nerd world, we don't refer to them as compact discs, but rather CDs.
Yeah, a lot of used chewing gum, I remember from middle school, as ABC, right? Already been chewed gum.
Okay, so based on what we said, I'm hearing A's, B, C, D.
Mm-hmm. And D. Mm-hmm. And then we can keep following with Washington, D.C. A BA is a bachelor's degree in English. I'm struggling with the last one, all but dissertation.
All I can think of is, just because it's hyphenated, is the ABD.
Oh, I think you're probably right about that. So we've got A through D, which are, the grades that you were watching for in your report card, hoping that you had more of one and less of another, right? Did we do it, Mike?
Well, you went with grades, and Sarah, if you click, they'll give you the answers. I had gone with possible combinations of answers for multiple choice tests, since that's often how we assess students. So like your bubble sheet, that could be an answer. And I still remember as a teacher, I had certain tests that I gave that I could still probably do some of them based off like ABC, ABD. Yeah, I can still do some off the top of my head, but there you go. So the common thread is answers.
Answers.
And you got it. It's an ABD PhD student, or EDD, which means you've got all your classwork done. Everything's finished except for the dissertation.
To turn in your dissertation. Well, thank you for that new piece of knowledge.
Yeah.
I like it.
So I guess because it's our last episode, why not do two connectors? I'm going to pose this question to Bridget and Mike to sit and reflect a little bit back on your school experience when you were growing up. What is the most memorable assessment you ever participated in? Like, could have been a good assessment, bad, or just plain ugly. And like, why was it memorable to you?
Like, this is so easy for me to answer. This will always stand out as the pinnacle of bad and ugly. I'm going to combine those two. And it was fourth grade, which was a long time ago for me. So for me to still have strong emotional content around that it says something. We were required to memorize all of the presidents in order, not just the presidents in order, but we had to memorize their dates in office. And so if they were in office more than once, you had to memorize those. Numbers, remembering numbers are not my forte. I can work with numbers. I'm good with math, but to just straight memorize something like that was all but impossible. And I remember I had to take the test multiple times because I failed it and then I failed it again. And it was really one of those instances where I was just going for whatever the minimum passing grade was going to be. I remember sitting in a chair in my dad's study, just crying because I thought I will never be able to do this. So that's mine.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you brought up the bad and the ugly, because as I sit here and rack my brain, those are the ones that stick with us.
Yes.
Because I think they're traumatic, and I'll use the term, right? I think they can be traumatic, especially at those younger ages. So let me try to then think of a good one. And as I'm sitting here thinking, I'm thinking about my senior English teacher, 12th grade. She was fantastic. We had a coffee pot in the corner of the room, and like she'd let kids bring in a cup of coffee. We'd have the desks in a circle, have conversations. And the assessment, as I think about it, it was an essay of some kind that we had to write. But the thing that I appreciated about it was that it was relevant to our lives, because it was about our local history of the local area, something we learned that we didn't already know. And it had to be not only informational, but also kind of persuasive. And it wasn't necessarily an assessment of, all right, sit down, like the blue books that we had in college, which, if you don't know what a blue book is, it's basically what, 8, 10 sheets of loose leaf paper stuck between construction paper, and it's blue. And you'd go buy them for $1.25 at the bookstore. And what we had to do, at least, was turn them into our professor. And then he gave us one off another stack, so that way you couldn't cheat and bring in notes. And it wasn't that kind of an assessment where it's sit down and now regurgitate everything out of your brain. The assessment was this essay, this paper we had to write, and she kept giving us feedback, and it was never good enough, right? And not saying like we never hit the target, but like there was always something more, right? We got to this point, well, hey, I think you could do a little more. What if we did this? What if we change this? How can we make it better? And someone help me. I'm going to slaughter the phrase, but don't let the good get in the way of better, or don't let better get in the way of best. I'm not sure exactly what the phrase is, but that's kind of her mentality. And so that stuck with me as just that assessment, where it wasn't this traumatic sitting down, having to take a test. It was her seeing where we were at and giving us that feedback for the next step.
And really setting those high standards and letting you know that she knew that you could reach them. So that's really powerful, Mike.
So I guess shout out to Ms. Simula, even though I'm sure she may not be watching this, but I'm going to give you credit anyways.
Yeah.
I will not name the teacher who put me through the pointless task of memorizing the terms of service.
Oh, I was the very anxious test taker. I would know that content inside and out. And then you put that test in front of me and start a timer. And it's like I had zero information in my head. I knew nothing because of all that pressure I felt. So I don't know if that's bad, if it's ugly. It was not good. But yeah. So I appreciate you guys sharing that. So with that, we are going to move into our engagement accelerators that we are going to kind of be hitting on for this webinar. We do have our one pager that you can click on this in the slide deck and get the printable version if you want that. Nothing has changed from previous versions, just like to keep it fresh in our minds. But as we move into this specific topic this evening, which is why Mike is joining us, we are going to really be focusing on student-centered learning and instructional moves. And I'm very curious to hear what he has to share around these, because those two things can really go hand in hand when they're paired intentionally. So moving into our topic, assessment for student learning.
Yeah, I am really happy to introduce our guest, who already, of course, has appeared in our connector. Dr. Mike Maksimchuk is current assessment consultant at Kent ISD. And Mike, is I'm just going to start out by saying he's a lot of fun to work with. He also has a pretty impressive CV. So Mike has spent over 15 years as a secondary teacher in the sciences area. Like I think it was physics and chemistry and maybe engineering. Am I getting that right?
You got it. I got the easy stuff to teach.
Yeah, exactly. So he took that, and while he was teaching all of that, he was also pursuing his advanced degrees. He has a doctorate in curriculum and instruction, and he has an administrator certification as well. So, Mike, I'm thinking that that probably really scaffolded you into the importance of assessment and using data in all parts of our system. As a side note, Mike also is a sailor, and so there's lots of sailing talk to be had when he's in the office, and we all enjoyed that. So, welcome to you, Mike, and thank you for bringing your expertise to us today.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to this conversation just to see kind of where it goes, and how we can connect not only assessment to the connectors, but then back to student learning and outcomes. So this episode we titled "From Transactional Grading to Transformational Learning." So how can we leverage these student engagement accelerators to humanize assessment? And if you look at that slide, there's a lot of words there and a lot of buzzwords. So let's break it down. Okay, let's just take a minute and even just look at the title. So transactional grading. If I think back to one of my teachers, and it was our health teacher, freshman year of high school, he was very proud that he very rarely, if ever, gave out A's. He loved being able to bust people's 4.0 GPAs. And he would always talk about, and I apologize if this is a little gross, but he would talk about school is about vomit. I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. He says, yes, it does. He says, I end up teaching you something. We shove it down your throats all day long. And then we get to the assessment and we ask you to throw it back up onto the paper. And
Yep.
okay, gross. But that's, to him, it was just like this transaction of, I have to give you something. You have to give it back, then I give you something else. And so that's really what he was getting at with a little bit more colorful metaphor for it. But in this scenario, that really is it. And it's not about the student learning, it's all about the grade. And it's just about what is that final grade. The grade is the currency. That's the currency students are trying to get in our classrooms. And how do we change that? So how do we turn an assessment into something that we are doing to students? And instead of it being this, gotcha moment, if you will, how do we use an assessment as a tool to sit beside our students, to learn what they know, and then use that information to guide our instruction, to scaffold information, so that way we can give them that next step. Vygotsky uses this phrase, proximal development. That's something most people are like, what does that mean, right? So let's change the P and the D from proximal development to productive difficulty. And so how can we use assessment to make it go from this gotcha, back and forth transaction to something that really is about the learning and not the grade? And so how can we now use these accelerators to humanize the assessment process? And I think I just added an important word in there that's not on the slide. Process, or process, if you so choose. And Margaret Heritage, who's a famous researcher in the assessment circle, she's British, and so she always calls it the process. So for Margaret, I'm going to call it the process this evening, at least on that slide. So, if I followed my own slides, I very easily could have had that entire last discussion with this up here. But again, that transactional grading, to kind of take that story I just told about our health teacher, it focused on compliance. We're going to sit down. You're going to take this test. I'm going to grade it. It's all about the points. It's using that assessment as a tool to certify what you know. There was no going back. There was no, hey, Mike, you missed. I'm just going to stick with health. And let's say nutrition. I'm making this up as I go. But, you missed the part about really understanding the purpose of carbohydrates. That wasn't part of it. It was, you got a 78%, bud. We're moving on to the next unit. And so that really is more about the teacher giving the grade and it's high stakes, right? There's not a lot of feedback other than maybe a number. And if a lot of us think back to our education, that's all we got. We didn't generally get a lot of feedback. You felt kind of excited if you got a couple words on an essay, like, I liked this, or, what did you mean here? That's what we got for feedback. And we teach the way that we were taught because that's what we know. And so my push is, let's think outside that box of what we are used to, what we're accustomed to, and how can we now use assessment truly as transformational. So how can we use assessment as a tool to sit beside our student? And that's the at least second time I've said that. And the reason is because assessment comes from the Latin word assedere, which means to sit beside. So how can you use that tool of sitting beside someone to focus on their learning? How can we use that assessment to learn where they're at, to give them the next steps? How can we use that assessment to have the students think about what they know and what their next steps need to be? And how do we make that a process of feedback? We assess all the time. I have a 6 3/4 year old son at home, soon to be 7, working with him on reading. I don't sit there and give him a test and then say, oh, hey, and I'm going to call it a test purposely. Hey, buddy, you got 8 out of 10 on that. You better work on that. And then move on. Oh, parents don't do that. You sit down next to him and say, hang on, go back and reread that. What did that say? Are you sure? Right? And then have some conversation around it. And I don't remember the word where it came from, but test comes from etymologically, literally a test where you would take metal and find out its purity by melting it. So it's a trial by fire. So if you think about a test as that trial by fire versus an assessment as you're sitting next to that student, I think that right there is a big mind shift in itself.
So even shifting some of that language, Mike, can help us change our view of what assessment is and what its purpose is.
Yes. And so I think assessment versus test is a huge change, but I also think adding that word process in there, because that makes you think about it is indeed a process. And that brings up this quote from Sadler. He was the original, he's the OG who came up with this idea of where are students, what do they want, how do we get them there, and where are they at? So the way he put it was the student must understand the goal, their current state, and how to bridge the difference. And I think this comes up very often. A lot of researchers, and I'm not going to drop names because I don't want anyone to say I agree or disagree with anyone, but think of what is it that we want our students to know? Where are students at right now? And how do we get them there? Or some variation of that, I would say a lot of vendors share. And that is the process, right? So not only do we have to have that learning target for our students, they need to understand what that target is, because we're not going to just drive aimlessly. We need a target. We need an endpoint to get to. They need to know where they're at, and we need to learn how to get there. So let's now talk about these accelerators. So as I start to think about some different aspects or different resources that I've used with assessment, I've thrown a few up here, and Bridget asked me if I could try to map these resources of things that I consider like the pinnacle of how do I engage students in the assessment process. How can we then tie them back to the accelerators? And so at the bottom of the screen, I put little pictures that to me tied back. And so Bridget, I'm going to ask if you can, as I discuss these, maybe help me tie them together as well, just so that way it's not just my voice the entire time as well. So the first resource is the ALS, which stands for the Assessment Literacy Standards. This is a document that comes from the Michigan Assessment Consortium, which is a great group if you are interested in assessment in the state of Michigan. And it is standards of like preparation standards of what should you know? What should you know and how should you think? What are those dispositions and what should you be able to do with assessment, not only as a teacher, but as a student, as an administrator, and as a parent. And so those are fantastic resources just to think about. And again, it might just be reframing in your mind of how do we think about these? This is not necessarily all right, here's one more document to add on to your stack of things you need to reference every week when you do lesson planning. No, it's an idea, it's a way of thinking about assessment. And so I tried to tie this to two of the accelerators.
Yeah, Mike, so I'm looking at, you've got asset-driven teaching and climate environment queued up there. I'm really intrigued by thinking about those literacy standards as, I'm going to say, like a training tool for the teacher brain, but also to be able to share in whatever developmentally appropriate form that would be, to share those concepts and ideas with your students so that they're also thinking about what information can I get out of here and how will it show, how can it show what I already or have learned to do so that I can know what's the next thing. I think there's a lot of power in that. Can you speak a little more to the creation of climate and environment with that literacy standards piece?
Yeah, so I think if we shift from this idea of test to assessment, it now goes from it's something the teacher's doing to me, like the Miss Trunchbull or whatever her name was from the movie Matilda, stomping down the halls. It's now something that we are doing together, right? It's not something I am doing to you. And so that's a little bit of a mind shift there. And if we think about these literacy standards, assessment literacy standards,
Mhm.
specifically, and we think about them from the student side, we hear about metacognition all the time. What does that mean to people, right? And so we need to teach our students, like, let's think about some self-reflection. Let's think about what is it that I know? How do I know it? And we have to really teach students what that is. And so those standards, to me, help bridge some of those ideas and really give us the ideas and thoughts behind how do we help our students think about their thinking, and how do we help students self-assess to learn what those next steps would be, so that it really takes, again, that assessment from something I'm doing to you to something we're going to participate in together to improve your learning, not to get a grade. Here you go. Here's the cash.
Right. So really setting up that partnership. It makes me think about Zaretta Hammond's work and the way that you need to position yourselves when diving in deep and building that trust with the student. What you're describing fits right along with that.
So then the second one, if we're ready to move on.
Yeah.
Okay. So the second one is we call it the CEAS as an acronym. So CEAS, the components of an equitable assessment system. Again, this is another document that comes from the Michigan Assessment Consortium, which I believe is linked later on in the PowerPoint. And if you want to click on it, you can also look it up right off the Michigan Assessment Consortium's website, which is also, I'll call it the MAC a lot, MAC, the MAC, just so that it's shorter. I'm not sitting here talking about a McDonald's burger. But so this is another document, a foundational document that the MAC came up with, and it talks about how do we make assessment equitable for all students. And I know some people don't like the E word, right? Equity, so we'll call it fair, right? How do we make sure that that assessment is really focusing on what is it that the student knows, and how do they show their journey towards proficiency in that standard? And how do we then take out some of these other mitigating factors? How do we remove the noise, if you will, from that assessment? And so within that, there are 10 principles or components of the equitable assessment system. And I'm not going to go through all 10 because no one wants to sit here and listen to me read a PowerPoint or a slideshow to them. But if you click on it and take a look and dig into it later, there's a lot of really great resources. It gives examples on what it looks like in action as well, right in that document.
Yeah, so you've got belonging and student-centered accelerators here, and the way that you're describing that makes perfect sense to me. So even the short description here to bring students in, we want that student voice in there, and we want that student ownership and agency around their learning. And it sounds like the CEAS document or framework is something that would be helpful with that, Mike.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what's in there, it's relating it to their own context, right? It's taking that assessment and again, making it not something the teacher is doing to them, but it's their way of showing, here's what I know about this particular standard or this topic, and relating it back to their own lives and in a way that makes sense for them.
And I think that is such a huge relationship builder in there when you're empowering students to bring their voice to the table, and really giving them some of that agency, not just in their learning, or their environment, but like in how this plays out. And I think that like if a teacher entrusted me with that back in the day, like I'd be like, you trust me to know to show you what I know, and you're gonna go with it. Like I think that would be amazing. And like I would have such a deeper respect for that teacher, I think, just through that experience.
And so the next one is part of the CEAS, but I pulled it out separate because I think this is a huge, huge accelerator. How do we tie the standards that we are teaching back to a student's lived experience? Because if they don't see how this relates to their lives, if they don't see how they are either going to use it, have used it, or how it will impact them, why learn it? Okay. So Bridget, you, I think,
Mike, I've
said,
never used those dates of office, not once, not ever in my life.
okay, now I have to
Yes.
also, I'm going to admit, and I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here. When you said that you had to memorize those terms of service, I, for some reason, went to you memorized like your Apple or your Verizon bill term of
I thought
service.
that
Oh,
too.
it felt like that.
Yeah. And I thought, okay, so Bridget's sitting here memorizing like the fine print that no one reads that you just scroll through until you just want to, hit accept at the bottom.
Yeah, yeah. Nope. I just
Terms of
nope,
service
just
as
the
in
years that they were in office. Yeah. And
yeah.
again,
So
I wouldn't argue that knowing who the presidents are has been helpful and in an historical context, but the exact dates that they were in office did not help me. And it was very irrelevant to me and to this day remains so.
okay, so
So
let me ask.
that authentic is a big word there, isn't it, Mike?
It is. And I think the reason you learned those was because you learned it because education was an important thing. And it was something that we have to learn this because this is what we're being told we have to learn. And I think this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think there's been a shift. And the shift is now more towards we need to make it relevant to their lives. And the students see that. I think part of it might be technology, part of it could be who knows, right? Like who knows? If I knew the answer to that, I would be making, millions of dollars. But with that shift, we now know that we need to include that student context. And so, again, I think we already kind of covered this, but not only is that the student voice, but it's also that belonging where it's now they can see themselves in their assessments as part of that process.
And I think if we're not giving it to them, Mike, they're demanding it. And they're demanding it by disengaging. That if we want to promote learning that is meaningful to students, then we have to make it authentic, or they're going to show us that they don't feel that way. And when we talk about student engagement, which is what this is all about, I think that's one of the quickest, or maybe one of the first things that we need to look at is the learning that we are putting in front of them relevant to them. Can we somehow connect it and show them how it's connected? Then that's like, do that next.
And I don't know if this has come up in any of the previous episodes, but I'm going to go ahead and throw a phrase out there and see how this sticks with you guys. But when you start talking about engagement, and you just said it a second ago, relevance and engagement. So if the standards aren't relevant to the student, they're not going to be engaged. And if you're not engaged, what are you doing? You're daydreaming, you're sleeping, you're doing something else in class. And so when we see classroom management problems in the classroom, I think a lot of times that management is a manifestation of a classroom engagement problem. And it might be that it's too easy for a student and we might need to scaffold and challenge them, or it might be too hard and they're just shutting down, right? And so again, that's where the assessment comes in to see where we're at with that student and see, okay, do I need to, bump it up for them and give them something to enrich this and dig deeper? Or do I need to do some more scaffolding, maybe some remediation? And so that leads us then naturally to this next section, which is just assessment, which we've already talked about. It's sitting next to that student. And this is the bridge between our instruction, whether it's direct instruction, if it's project-based learning, if it is co-learning, whatever that looks like in the classroom, how do we then know where we're at? Going back to those 3 questions Sadler had, or those 3 points. How do we know where we're at so that what that next step needs to be as we move towards proficiency? One other thing I will throw out there for the audience is I would also, if we're talking about mindset shifts and terminology shifts, let's move away from the word mastery and let's move towards proficiency, because I have yet to master walking. I tripped the other day, right? I'm proficient. I can do it most of the time, but I haven't mastered it. And so that's just something to think about in there. And then finally,
Yeah, and the argument too, Mike, I think is always like, I'm a literacy person, so I think about this in terms of literacy, but I certainly consider myself continuing to grow as a reader, even though I've been doing it most of my life. The more complex or different sorts of material I take on, the more I learn about how to be a better reader. And there's no end point, hopefully, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then so the last one's then just engagement. So how do we now, again, it says mapping engagement to assessment, and I have assessment and engagement as 2 of the things. I get it, but really it's just taking that student and from like passive compliance to, sit down and take this test because I said you have to having them engaged in the work and having some self-agency and saying, hey, I want to show you that I know this standard. I want to show you I know this, but I don't like the way you have it. Can I show you a different way? What would you say to that? Sarah, I'm going to ask you that, okay? I'm going to throw you here. So if you were in the classroom and you were teaching and you had an assessment, let's just say a standard old test, how would it hit you if I, as a student, said, I don't like this test. I don't like the way this is because I don't feel like I can really explain it. But could I do a model and a little essay that goes with it to show you that I know this?
I would say less and encourage them to do that, because that would tell me on so many ways that that assessment that I have created might not be reaching my learners in a way. Maybe either the questions are not worded correctly, that maybe they're too high level, maybe because I've taught it 5 hours throughout the day that I miss saying something to this one class. But I am also of the mindset of hands-on learning can be some of that best learning. And that also goes for assessment too, because when students have, going back to the student-centered learning and even asset-driven teaching, like if they have the opportunity to bring that to the table, like game changer. Why are we limiting them to, we do need to know how to write essays. We know how to write longer, text and things like that. But if that is not the goal of what we're trying to get them to do, why are we forcing that? And why are we not leaning into their voices and allowing them to come forward with ideas? So I would celebrate that, me personally.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as it is a way to show that you are proficient in standard. Yeah, as long as you are able to demonstrate that. So keep on keeping on. So let's talk about what does this look like maybe in action. And so there are kind of 4 areas I think I want to talk about. And one is that knowledge and fact, skills and procedures, synthesis or creation, and then some metacognition. And when we talk about content type, there are really 4 big ones, where it's the knowledge, skills and procedures, and then creation of a product or process. And traditionally, I think a lot of times we as teachers will use selected response, which is the fancy assessment way of saying something where you just pick the answer. So multiple choice, matching, right? Any of those types of things. Why do we do it? It's fast, right? It's something you could throw into a Google form and it'll spit out the answers so you get instant grades. I said grades, not feedback. So that's giving you a score, which that's currency, right? So we aren't getting the feedback that we're after. So if we are going to shift this kind of into an accelerator method, if we're looking at knowledge, or if we're looking at facts, make some checklists for the kids. Like, do you know this? Do you know this? How can you explain this? And you might want to reword one particular content or one particular idea 2 or 3 times. Because they might say, yes, I know, that the sky is blue, but then they might say it later, oh, I can't really explain, why the sky's the color it is.
So when
And
I
feel
look at this, Mike, I'm almost going back to what you said earlier. So are you getting at that for these different content types, our traditional approaches are those tests and these accelerator methods are really leaning more into the assessments?
yes. To put it succinctly, yeah. The assessments that we have given, again, how we were all assessed, so kind of what we're used to, that comes from the Industrial Revolution. If you really go back, there's some research that shows that's where we started this almost like factory style, like moving through style of assessment and or teaching and testing, trial by fire versus if you think back to like the Greeks and Socrates, get out the toga and be glad I don't have a bed sheet, otherwise I'd be putting it on right now and making myself a toga. But he sat in the Socratic method. He sat and talked, and he asked a million questions all day, and just kept asking questions, and that's how they learned. And so, yes, Sarah, to put it in a nutshell, if we want to move towards accelerating students and engaging them, we need to assess them, not test. Okay, so that's the mic drop, so I can be done, right?
Yeah.
No, not yet. So Beth
So-
has shared that she is in CTE work or college and career. I never remember what CTE exactly stands for, but I know it is college and career focused. No,
Career and technical education. At least I think that's
Thank
what I
you.
think it is.
Career and technical education. Beth, you're going to let us know if we're close. I 100% should know what that acronym is, and I apologize that I'm not doing a good job with it right now. What she has to say is that they often are working within project-based items as with their students. And so they have recently started portfolios around the project-based work with reflective journals about their learning. And that's just phenomenal and powerful. And I'm also thinking about, Beth, the opportunities for students to move in and out of that individual thinking and into collaborative thinking and co-constructing meaning and checking in and then coming back and having the teacher professor be a facilitator around that. I mean, what engaging work that has the potential to be.
Yeah. And so sticking with that CTE thought for a moment, skills and procedures, that's, I would say, a good chunk of what is happening in CTE. So yes, there's the content knowledge of here's why something happens or here's how we do it. But then applying the knowledge, right? It's applying the knowledge in those courses. And so a lot of times, if you wanted to, could you give a paper-based test on a skill or a procedure or a process? If I'm a science teacher, could I ask a student, rank these steps in order for how to do a agar plate for a petri dish and, to culture something? Could you? Sure. Is it effective? No. Now, getting the kids in the lab and saying, okay, let's do it. Show me how you do it. That's a performance task. And then with that, you should have a rubric. And it might be how they get to it and how they really start to show that they know those skills. Co-creating the rubric with students, having them look at kind of where they're at, that's fantastic as well. So that way they know right away, here's my target. Here's where I want to get to. So they're not just wandering aimlessly. We can discuss single column or single point rubrics another day. If anyone's interested, feel free to reach out. But synthesis and creation, again, that's really showing those project-based portfolios, that purpose of their work, versus just here's an essay. And finally, metacognition. How do we assess that? Most of the time, I think it's going to be, tell me about your thinking or, share your reflection with me, which ends up being just like an essay, right? And that's it. They turn it in, gets a grade. That's a test, right? Because it's becoming transactional. It's not feedback. And so I think that metacognition, if that can turn into a reflective journal or a reflective notebook that then the teacher kind of uses for feedback to start a conversation, that's going to engage with the student more. And I guess if you need another little nugget, like in a nutshell, if we want to engage students in assessments, don't grade it. And I know that's hard to sometimes kind of wrap your head around. But if we want to engage students and actually engage them in an assessment to see where they're at, sit beside them and get those next steps, we need to give them feedback that is constructive, that's positive, that's also moving them forward, where they're at and what those next steps are. We put a score on it, put a smiley face, 10 out of 10, A plus, whatever. That's all they're going to look at. If you look at your students next time you give them a rubric, if there's a score on it, look to see what they look at. They're not going to look to see if you took comments or if you circled things on it. They're going to look at the grade, put it away. Try this as an experiment. Take the grade off. Give them a rubric. Circle things, give them comments, and see how they react to that. They're going to sit and read it because there's no summative, okay, here's what I got. Here's my change back, if you will. All right. So again, getting into student-centered agency assessment, again, I've said this, so I don't think I need to repeat it, but assessment is something we do with our students, and that's how they're engaged in the assessment. Okay, we can show them how to identify gaps. We can explain to them how to accept feedback. And I think feedback literacy is something to discuss. We need to look at how do we teach students to use data to change behaviors, to change learning, versus it being a instant, like, I'm a horrible person and I'm just going to take everything you said and internalize it that it's bad. How do we use it as that presumed positive intent? How do we say, hey, the teacher's trying to help me out here? And this slide I just love because this is something that I think is very real. We try to give our students kind of a compliment, give them a little constructive criticism and a genuine compliment. And what they're hearing is, oh, I have to say something nice, and then I'm going to, tear you apart, and then I got to say something nice again to finish it off. If we can change that mindset, that really is going to help them take that feedback to the next step. I think at this point, I'm going to hand it back over to you guys, right? And so that way you can talk maybe a little bit more about some of the data that we had collected and how we used that even within the webinar.
Yeah, so we can talk a little bit about how we collected the data. And then Mike, I'd love for you to say something about how you processed this. Does that sound good?
Yep. Who wants control of the slideshow?
You can give it to me.
Okay.
So for those of you who have submitted sketch forms over the course of this whole school year with any of the episodes, we of course read all of those, and we have taken that information specifically on what like your thoughts about the actual episodes. So what did you like? What would you suggest? What would you like to see different? Those sorts of things. And we've been monitoring them all along, but we've been also looking at how can we take this cumulatively to really make decisions about what next year is going to look like, or do we continue with this? Is this something that is of value to people? So we shared access to that information with Mike, and he used some of his knowledge and AI skills to try to come up with like a general direction and some types of things that we can use as we're making those decisions going forward. Sarah, what would you add to that?
I think we didn't just read through all of your responses and look for like the numbers that you provided, looking at the qualitative and quantitative responses that you provided. And I think what really stood out to me and is kind of captured on here too, like, you want more of this, and you can't put a number to that always, kind of thing. And so like knowing that there is a desire to learn more about this, maybe all of those check-ins that we had after these assessments or after these webinars to give sketch credit were more so mini formative assessments for Bridget and I to see where you're at, how we can continue to support these. And I honestly love that 72% that is on there. Like, I was in seeing that number, like, that tells me already that people who have participated in these are not just soaking up this information, but they want to put it into practice. And that is what I think Bridget and I were hoping originally when we kicked off this, to not just share about student engagement, but to dig more in it where it's piquing your interest and you're doing some self-reflection around this. And all those times you filled out those sketch credit forms, essentially, like that was Bridget and I sitting alongside of you, getting that feedback and making the next episode more reflective of what you need and what you want.
So
Yeah,
real quick before we go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike, please.
I was gonna say just so one thing we did is I took the data that they provided and I made sure we removed any PII, just like we should do in our classrooms, make sure that it's not traceable back to a student, et cetera. So that way we keep everything FERPA and COPA compliant. I purposely left something on this slide that it output from the AI tool that we used. If you look at the bottom, it says top request, a clear connection between the student engagement and assessment literacy, or MacDocs. You guys hadn't talked about that yet. It was pulling from me, from my history. And so just here's my 3-second, you hear about people, you got to be the human in the loop. You can't just take it for face value and just run with it. I very purposely left that in there. Bridget and I looked at this last week and we decided to leave it in there as kind of that note. So yes, can we use some different tools to help with some of that data analysis, to help find what those actions are to move forward with our students? Yes. With a big grain of salt, right? We need to make sure that we are continuing to be that human to smell check, if you will, the results and make sure that it makes sense. Because we looked at that and we had a good chuckle.
We laughed,
came up with that.
And everything else is right on point. Those actionable goals were goals that people were saying, I'm going to do this next week, or I'm going to go talk to so-and-so, and really concrete next step type goals. And then over and over, we heard, we want to see some engagement strategies. We kind of want to see more of this in action. What can I turn around and do? And then, that tap, I'm like, hey, how did you slide that in there, Mike? It's like a little ad for what you do.
So bringing up the voice of the participant, right? One of those engagement accelerators. And so again, from the AI tools, we asked, okay, so what are some other things that you have found? So things to continue, from my side, again, using the data now to give you some constructive feedback that hopefully you take constructively and not as an indictment of who you are as a person. Continue modeling those accelerators during your presentations. Give participants some time to maybe collaborate and do some planning on how to use it, and then really explicitly connect those different sessions that you're engaging with back to those foundational documents, to those accelerators. Areas for refinement, just things to think about as you move forward into next year, would be giving some more time to specific walkaways, right? What's something that you can use? Tomorrow is Wednesday. If you're watching this live, what's something that would be your Wednesday morning you could throw into action? Diving a little bit deeper into the student-centered data analysis, just as we start to look at the data that has been collected around student engagement accelerators. And then finally, how can we track some of the qualitative growth? Because that can be difficult. Quantitative is easier because we got a bunch of numbers, but how do we show that qualitative growth?
About engagement in particular, that's often the big question that we get as we're working with districts. But we want this, but we're not 100% sure. How do we measure it? There are multiple metrics that we're looking at, but is there one, or is there something that we can develop that really helps us get a clearer picture of what's happening with students?
So just real quick, from the last slide, as far as what's something that you could take away, I have put together a prompt library, which we call AI for Assessment, to go along with our EdTech team's AI for series. And in there are a whole lot of different prompts that you can use to not only maybe look at your assessments from a qualitative side as far as next steps. There are prompts that you just copy and paste the entire thing and look at what are some possible biases in the assessment, coming up with a parallel assessment, like a Form B, if you will, if you offer reassessment for students, just to give them a different opportunity to show their knowledge for those standards. So you can use those, synthesize the reflections. Sarah's taking you to it. Thank you. And so the second page of this document is a table of contents. They're all hyperlinked. And so you're already halfway down in it, which is awesome. So if you take a look on the left-hand side, any one of those, like right here, this is instructional utility, the entire thing. And some of these are 2 or 3 sentences. This one I think is a full page. And you copy and paste the whole thing into your tool of choice, because I wrote this very purposely agnostic of any particular LLM. You copy that in, put your assessment with it, and it will give you some things to consider and think about and kind of act as that thought partner with you.
Yeah, Mike, I know that was a ton of work for you to do, and I really appreciate that. We've got people that are tapping into that prompt library, and it's saving them all kinds of time. So thank you for that.
Yep. So just to kind of wrap this up, so that way I don't have someone taking the sheep hook pulling me off stage. Again, feedback is the ultimate goal. When we assess someone, we're sitting next to them to provide feedback. And so if we talk about the feedback process or the feedback loop, from what's the goal, how do we teach it, how do we check, do they know it or not, how do we then provide that feedback and next steps, and then do that action, then start all over again, right? So I think we've done that. And I think we've given you guys some feedback, and as we look forward to next year's season.
Yeah, thanks for teeing that right up too. So Mike, you've got several links of things that you mentioned tonight, certainly that Michigan Assessment Consortium. Is there anything here that you would want to highlight, or do you feel like, nope, I've mentioned those?
I know we've talked a lot about a lot of these resources. I think the 2 that I want to mention just real fast. If you are ever looking for a resource to do some like micro learning with some colleagues, if you're having some discussion around assessment, the learning points link, that takes you to an entire library of different learning points from the Michigan Assessment Consortium. They're all 1 page front and back on very specific topics. So you can use those. Really easy to have some conversation around, and they're all grounded in research and best practices. And then the other thing just to share real quick, formative assessment for Michigan educators. It's a program through the MDE. FAME is what we call it. And that is really just digging into, hey, there's Margaret Heritage right there that I was just talking about. And so it's really talking about how do we engage students in assessment as a process and to use it formatively towards those learning targets.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I know I've used learning points alongside you with some of the sessions that we collaborated on. They were fantastic, very targeted. Okay, so here it is moving forward. Don't forget, if you are here live or if you have viewed this as a recording and you want to get that sketch, don't forget to fill out that exit ticket. That is what will record your sketch for you. And we're actually close to this date now. Sarah, remember back when we were saying this date in September, it seemed ridiculous. And now it's so close. Yeah. So please make sure to get all of those filled out and sent in by Friday, May 23rd. Having said that, the video links will remain available. We just won't be open to collecting sketch credit anymore on that. And yes, we did listen to the feedback, Dr. Mike. So thanks for helping us walk through some of that together. You let us know that you are interested in this content, but sometimes it's really hard to find the time to engage in this. So we are going to try to meet that for you by feeling engaged in Express. So instead of a 1-hour live webinar, which was also recorded, we are going to produce 15-minute videos. So everything together in a very compact, targeted 15 minutes. They'll be focused tightly on those engagement accelerators, and they will lean heavily into usable strategies because that is what you asked for over and over again. We are going to add in some demos from local schools and classrooms so that we can talk about it and then see it in action. With the viewing of the 15-minute video and then like a response form where you're doing a little bit of reflecting, you can earn up to a 0.5 sketch for each episode that you watch. If there is anything that you think would make that better or that you want to comment on or that you want to suggest, please let us know when you fill out that sketch form or reach out to either Sarah or myself at any time. We'd love to hear continued feedback, and we're really excited about making this concentrated learning that fits in anywhere.
Bridget, can I make one suggestion? If you're doing
Sure.
it as an Express, I think you need to go like choo choo, or you need to, there needs to be a train involved with this.
Oh, well, we'll
Choo-choo.
do the best we can. Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
And as I mentioned at the beginning, we have our Double Down with an application where you can put your learning from today or whenever you watch this into action to receive an additional sketch credit. So don't be afraid to do that. And then we have upcoming professional learning opportunities from Bridget, myself, and Mike. And if you are ever looking to dig more into student engagement in general, please reach out to Bridget or I, and we're happy to explore options with you as we're doing this with several districts right now.
Absolutely. Ooh, that's a wrap on episode 9, I think.
Yeah, that's a wrap for 25-26.
Yeah, thank you everybody for being a part of it. We really appreciate it. Please stay connected. Dr. Mike, thank you so much.
Yes,
Hey, thank you guys for having me. This was a blast.